Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Tonight we have a late night insight video on a rare, discontinued, well, vaulted Creed. Creed doesn't discontinue things, they vault things. Yes, sire. But rumored to be, according to the massive Creed marketing machine, originally released in 1933. And it is my understanding that this particular decant that one of my perfume god people very kindly sent me came from a vintage bottle, because Creed did re-release this in 2019, although I hear that the re-release of this is pretty good. And this is called Creed Angelique Encens. Angelique Encens from 1933. So like I said, this is vintage juice that we're discussing. I love talking about these rare, discontinued Creed fragrances from the past. My favorite way to kind of experience the brand is to go backwards, not forwards. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But it is rumored to have been credited as Marlene Dietrich's signature scent. And Marlene Dietrich apparently is a big time star, German actress. She played in a lot of films from the 1910s all the way to the 1980s. So if you're into German theater, you probably know who Marlene Dietrich is. She was a huge star. She performed in everything from silent films all the way from into things like Blue Angel from 1930, Morocco 1930. I think she had an Academy Award for Dishonored in 31, Shanghai Express and Blonde Venus in 32, The Scarlet Empress in 34, The Devil is a Woman 35. In World War II, she was known to be sort of a humanitarian, if you will. She took in, injured soldiers and housed exiles and stuff like that. She was an amazing woman by all accounts. And so Creed is claiming that this was her signature scent. Well, it was exclusively made for her in 1933, and we're just lucky as the public to get to try it, apparently, is what the marketing says. So anyways, Creed needs to get their shit together now that it's 2024. But it is credited as her signature scent. That's the rumor from the brand. Now, I think they've really gotten away from that. I'll tell you what the new. Well, I guess they have gotten away from it. I shouldn't say they need to get away from it. They have, because the new landing page, if you go to creedboutique.com and pull up Angelique Encens, you will see that it says originally created in 1933. Angelique Encens evokes a decadent feeling of ethereal mystery, rarely experienced by the public since its creation. We're so blessed. Angelique Encens has been released from the vault of the House of Creed's private collection in limited quantities. Act now. Don't let future regret play a role. Anyways, so you see there's no mention of Marlene Dietrich anymore. All that's been brushed under the rug as if it never happened. It's been memory hold, So anyways, that is a little bit of a backstory on the scent. Although, just from the way that it smells, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if this was a Pierre Bourdon creation from the 1980s. It opens up with hints of Creed Venezia, which I reviewed on the channel. It's one of my all-time favorite Creeds. I got multiple bottles of Venezia. I absolutely love this stuff, and it really makes me wonder who authored Venezia if it wasn't Pierre Bourdon himself. But so let me read you the note listing. This is according to Parfumo for the 1933 version. Angelica and tuberose in the top, frankincense and amber in the heart, with a base of vanilla. Okay, so pretty simple note listing, as some of these older Creeds are. All right. So here's how this starts out. So Angelique Encens basically starts out with this ambery type of accord that just hits you from the very beginning. And you would think with the name Angelique Encens that the very first thing you're going to get is huge angelica and huge incense. Although, no, you're kind of hit with this old school, very vintage in style, though, amber accord that will remind you of things like Cote d'Emeraude or Shalimar. There's no getting away from those two. Those two are huge, representations here. Maybe even Dana's Taboo, something along those lines, okay? But what's interesting is the two main names in the fragrance, Angelica and Incense, begin to pull on the amber accord. But to my nose, they kind of start to pull in different directions, okay? So one thing that is for certain is it certainly seems that the Oriental accord here in Angelique Encens is much more amped up than one might expect if you start reading the blurb or the note listing or the write-up, okay? It as I said, hints at Shalimar, but it's not a full-fledged take on Shalimar like I would say Venezia to me really feels like Creed does Shalimar in their own sort of style. Here, the incense and the Angelica begin to pull the fragrance in a little bit of a different direction, all right? And so it's a beautiful creation, though. I'll tell you that right from the get go. But it does pull it in different directions. It goes in its own way, if you will. Hints to the past, but goes in its own way. And I really like this. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a big fan so far. I've only had a chance to test it a couple times, but I'm a big fan. So the incense, what ends up happening is the incense comes across as smelling very dry and almost caustic in a way. And the incense makes the amber itself start to feel dry. And what's interesting though about that dryness is later on, as the hours tick by, the fragrance will start to feel wet. So you talk about the master of kind of contrast here, but it's almost like the incense note here is like corroding, or it has this like acidic reaction on the amber in a way, and it starts to make the amber feel very, very dry, almost like the amber itself is beginning to catch smoke or to catch fire, okay, from this like chemical reaction of the incense, as if you've kind of put the amber to the flame, and it's taken a while, but finally little bits and pieces of the amber are starting to kind of catch fire, catch smoke. um, Meanwhile, on the other side of the amber, the Angelica is kind of pulling the scent into this kind of green, spicy, earthy, slightly rooty sort of territory, okay? Where there's all this bitter undergrowth, all these bitter green plant-like things start to happen here. And so Angelica was obviously very successfully used in one of my favorite creeds of all time, Royal Oud, but it's Pierre Bourdon's own creation for Frederic Malle, Bois de Rage, or French Lover, depending on which version you have. Um, that reminds me the most of the way that the Angelica is used here. And again, that makes one go, I wonder. But there's this very woody, herbaceous green sort of like undergrowth happening, if you will. It just seems like it's kind of one of those things where no sweet florals or no kind of milky plants will grow, which we'll talk about here in a little bit why that's important. But instead, it's kind of dominated by like vines and roots and weeds and all these plants that if you took a machete and cut through all of this heavy undergrowth, you would get this green, bitter type smell that would come to you. This earthy bitterness. But at this point in the fragrance, it feels dry when it first kind of hits you and starts to kind of interact with the amber. To me, it feels very, very dry. And you know, both the Angelica and the incense are in the name, but they're not the focal point, is what's so interesting about this. The amber almost feels like it's like this blob-like amber, like as if the incense and Angelica are kind of pulling the amber in separate directions, and instead of just splitting in half, the amber does its like best Stretch Armstrong impersonation, and it's stretching, but it's not breaking, and it's allowing these other materials to kind of pull it in these different directions, which makes Angelique Encens feel like its own creation. Even though it has those nods to the past, it feels like its own creation. So there's definitely some sort of underlying spice that starts to take hold, really starts to take stage, and you really start to notice it. Usually well, I've only tested this a couple of times. So the couple of times that I've tested it, half hour to an hour mark is where it really started to appear. Now, there's no spice listed in the breakdown that I gave you. However, if you go to the new version, the 2019 version of Angelique Encens, there is this white pepper note. And white is a theme that I think easily could be applied to this, even the vintage, over and over again. If you can imagine like white smoke when they're choosing a pope, or someone in a white cloak, or there's this feeling of like, when certain things are burned, the fire gives off white smoke. Like imagine burning like paper or straw or something where the fire emits this white smoke like feel. So imagine like your breath on a cold day, this white smoke kind of coming out, and imagine the warmth of your own breath kind of clashing with, the coldness of the outside. That is what the clash of, I would say, the incense and the amber really feel like, the amber accord feel like to me. So, but getting back on track, the spiciness, I have no clue where it's coming from. Like I said, no spicy notes listed in the vintage version. The new version says there's coriander in it, which would make sense here as the spicy accord, as it kind of starts coming to your nose more and more, it almost feels like there's like this sort of warmth to it, you know? It's a warm spice. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a hint of cinnamon in here, but the new version does list coriander. I don't know if the vintage version had that as well or not, but coriander can come across as a very warm spice from time to time. And so it's a quite welcome sight, I would say, with the way that the fragrance is kind of breaking down and coming to your nose. So really quick, we're going to do a quick water break, and then we'll continue on. Okay, excuse me. So I would venture to say that if you've watched many of my videos, you will have heard me talk about this contrast in perfumery over and over and over again, and how important it is. Pierre Bourdon is kind of one of the masters of that contrast. If you go back to some of his all-time great fragrances, like just grab any of them, but Koros, for example, has this contrast between the dirty elements and the clean elements in Koros. This contrast between dirty and clean. Here, what's interesting is that there's two sort of contrasting points, if you will. The way that the incense and the Angelica kind of pull on the amber, and both of those serve as very stark examples of contrast in perfumery. You may have noticed that when I was reading the note listing, I mentioned tuberose, but didn't even give it a mention so far, even though it's in the top. And the reason being is that the tuberose here plays a far secondary role to the way that the smell kind of breaks down. To be quite honest, that is the way I prefer my tuberose to be used. I don't like the ultra milky, camphoraceous aspects. It's one of the reasons I don't own a bottle of Cardinal Flower or anything like that. I don't like it to be front and center. I like it in the background, okay? And here you just get maybe the slightest tint of this narcotic white floral. You know, it could even be confused for a little bit of jasmine. But they say it's tuberose. But it's in the background, and I actually think the tuberose adds a little bit of freshness to the whole composition. A slight floral take on freshness, but freshness nonetheless. Now, I really like this release. In fact, so much so, if I had a bottle, I would wear this no problem. I would have no problem wearing this as a man, even though I think this is originally marketed towards women. The 1933 releases, and I think when they re-released it in 2019, they put it in the women's bottles, if you will. But I would have no problem wearing this. I really enjoyed kind of getting to know this fragrance, so thank you to my perfume god person who sent this along. However, I will say, there are some points in the composition of the fragrance as it continues to dry down. Usually couple hour mark, an hour to 2 hour mark is where I've started to notice it both times that I've tested this. The fragrance starts to feel kind of powdery in a way that starts to put me off, okay? One of the things I so love about Shalimar is how it has that dirtiness to the composition, and the dirtiness survives well. It's there from the beginning, and it survives well into the dry down. It never becomes just another vanillic amber, okay? And I never get that sick powder puff dropped in the earth, dry earth feeling of Shalimar, okay? So for that reason, and due to the size of my collection, I would say I would just wear Shalimar if I really wanted to wear something like this. Very few fragrances move me like Shalimar does. Shalimar is a top 10 fragrance for me. I would just wear Shalimar. Now, just to be completely fair and unbiased, I'm going to try to be Switzerland here, but Angelique Encens has a little bit of that dirty vanillic amber, especially as the hours tick by. Later into the dry down, you get it. That's really what it kind of turns into. You start getting into the 4, 5, 6 hour mark, you're going to think it's a dirty sort of vanillic amber. And in fact, once it gets past that sort of strange heart where the powders start finding themselves kind of like coming in and out of focus, really is what ends up happening for the powdery accord that I don't care so much for. I really like the late dry down, because once those in and out of focus powders get out of the way, I like the dirty kind of vanillic. Maybe there's a little bit of animalics in here. Some have guessed civet or something along those lines. I have no idea. But the late dry down does feel very vintage Creed, if you will. You know, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it had that Creed ambergris, if it had that Creed sandalwood that smooths everything out, and maybe even some musk, because the dry down feels kind of a little bit blurred. You know, it's a little bit of a blurry like dry down. But this is very impressive work. And this, to me, anyways, proves to me that the way to sort of discover and experience and enjoy the House of Creed is to go backwards, not forward, not the shit that they're releasing now. Creed seems to be infected with the very same virus as every other big niche house that I've been coming across lately. You know, the Amouage, the Parfum de Marly's, the Initios, you name them. I mean, they're all infected with this virus, basically, is what it feels like, where they are just releasing stuff that feels so soulless to me, feels devoid of any sort of creativity, any artistic creativity. Like they're releasing it for the money and for the money alone, and the prices represent that. You know, I honestly, if you've noticed, I haven't talked about any of those new creeds that have come out. Queen of Silk or Centaurius or all that crap. I could care less if I even smell them, to be honest with you. And so anything that Creed has released since Kering has took over in the last couple of years, you know, if it falls on my desk, I'll do a video about it. Otherwise, I would be much more interested in going backwards in time. And I've often said, in order to understand the future, you have to sort of understand the past. There's a lot of creeds from the past that I have not yet smelled. So, you know, for me, that's kind of where I would prefer to go. I'd prefer to go backwards and research these older creeds. So, thank you to my perfume god person who sent this my way. Really enjoyed getting to know Angelique Encens and doing the video on it. If you have experience with this, I know this is going to be kind of one of those 99.9% of people are going to go, well, I'll never be able to smell that anyways. I'd love to, but it's kind of one of those things. You really have to hunt these down or go for one of the new juice, which I hear is still quite good, but I haven't smelled it to compare. So, but let me know what your thoughts are. As always, it's a pleasure. Hope everyone has a great night. Cheers. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.